Tonight, Starmer's cracked down on Labour MPs he thinks have been behaving badly. 4 backbenchers have been suspended from the parliamentary party, we're told pending a future review. While 3 more MPs have their perks taken off them, jobs helping the government boost foreign trade. We understand that Keir Starmer is taking the action because of repeated breaches of party discipline. This evening, though, it's causing consternation on the left. We'll bring you that reaction. Also tonight, the Prime Minister says Conservative former ministers have serious questions to answer over the Afghan data breach. We'll show you which ones were in office when the secret operation was happening. And ahead of a visit by Germany's Chancellor to the UK tomorrow, there's talk that 2 countries could get a direct rail link. Next stop, Berlin. And on a day when the government says it's cracking down on badly behaved backbenchers, we are joined by 2 saintly former MPs who I'm sure never got in any trouble whether they were on the green benches, Ian Blackford and Lord Ed Vaisey. They'll be with us for the next hour. It's Wednesday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Hello, good evening. Well, just as MPs are winding down for the summer, the axe falls. Keir Starmer has suspended 4 Labour MPs from the parliamentary party over the welfare rebellion. 3 others have lost their jobs as trade envoys. Now, you could see this as a show of strength. A man with a big majority not putting up with any nonsense from unruly backbenchers. And of course, it also sends a message to others who might be tempted to rebel later down the line. But look, I would just make 2 points. It is a risky move for a Prime Minister who's been criticised for being out of touch with his backbenchers, particularly, of course, before they break for the summer, always a worryingly long time for plotting. And remember, Keir Starmer himself admitted he could have handled things better.
You had to collapse your welfare reforms because you were going to lose a vote in the House of Commons. Are you just in denial? You've totally ignored my question.
No, I'm not, and we didn't get the process there right.
You see, I guess this is the other slightly confusing thing, because the government did change its policy after the welfare rebellion. You know, they listened and then they acted, so they must have thought the rebels were onto something. And that does beg the question, you know, are they being sacked for being in favour of current government policy? Now, I should say that Number 10 are claiming this is about more than that. You know, they've been sacked for organising, for plotting against the government, basically. And look, my sense, after reporting on various governments in Westminster for many years now, is that when you suspend MPs, it can be a sign of strength, but it can also be a sign of weakness. It depends on how strong you are at the time. So any potential fallout from this, and you know, perhaps there will be none, will tell us a lot about Keir Starmer's position. Well, in a moment, we'll cross to Central Lobby, where John Craig is standing by, because things have been getting pretty emotional over there over the course of this evening. But first, I want to get the latest with our political correspondent, Tamara Cohen, who's with me here in the studio. Tamara, what do you make of this?
So this is Keir Starmer cracking the whip and saying that these 4 MPs can no longer be in the Labour Party because of what we're told are repeated breaches of party discipline. It's not just welfare, it's all kinds of things. But clearly these 4 MPs, and shall we tell you who they are? They are Neil Duncan-Jordan, MP for Poole, Brian Leishman, Chris Hinchcliffe and Rachel Maskell. The 3 men were all elected only a year ago. Rachel Maskell was elected about 10 years ago, but they all were very upset about the government's plans to cut back sickness and disability benefits, and they rebelled, as did a lot of other MPs. But I think what the leadership find particularly was particularly egregious in their case was some of the criticisms they made. They said it was not a very Labour thing to do. Rachel Maskell, who was also very critical of the winter fuel allowance, on which there was also a massive U-turn, said it would plunge pensioners into poverty. They made it about Labour values. They've all also been angry about other things. Brian Leishman about the Grangemouth refinery in his constituency closing. But they are not really well-known figures. So these 4, plus another 3 MPs who have had a different punishment, they are all trade envoys. I'll tell you who they are: Rosanna Allen Khan, Bel Ribeiro Addy and Mohammed Yassin. And they are having that perk, which allows them to go on trade missions to interesting countries, taken off them because they were also rebelled over the welfare vote. Is this a sign of strength or weakness? I think it's triggered confusion among some MPs. The left-wing MPs in the party are angry. We had Ian Byrne, who's also very angry about welfare reform, saying that this will just roll out the red carpet for reform. We've had other MPs on the left or who are concerned about welfare saying that they seem to have won the argument, but appeared to have still lost the whip. They were hoping that Keir Starmer would listen and reach out, and that's not what seems to be happening. And you have other MPs who maybe felt aggrieved that they were doing the right thing, voting for the government's reforms, saw others criticising them in the TV studios. But some of them even tell me they think it feels a bit divisive.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see how the fallout does continue tomorrow. Thank you very much for bringing us up to speed on that. I just want to take you to Central Lobby now because our chief political correspondent, John Craig, is there. And John, I know you've had one particular conversation with one of the kind of rebel MPs, haven't you? What's the atmosphere like?
Well, I can tell you, I've just been down on the terrace. There's a real end-of-term mood, as you can imagine, because, I mean, to be honest, this is the last really big day, probably, in Parliament before the summer recess. There's what we call in the trade a one-line whip on tomorrow and Monday and Tuesday next week. And the mood amongst government loyalists, in contrast to the Labour left, is there's not much sympathy for those three new MPs. One MP said to me, oh, they're one-term wonders, they'll be out next time. However, there is huge sympathy for Rachel Maskell, who is a popular MP, seen as a very genuine crusader for poorer people and indeed older people. She was, of course, a critic of the winter fuel payment decision. Now, what happened was mid-afternoon, first of all, the three newish MPs went in to see the Chief Whip, Sir Alan Campbell, whose office is just a few yards away from where I'm standing now. And then in went Rachel Maskell. And then she came out of the office, about half a dozen journalists there waiting, and she was, to be honest, fighting back tears, very emotional. And she said, I'm not angry, I'm upset. She said, I've been suspended for fighting for my constituents on welfare. She said, I'm fighting for people who really matter, the poorest in our society. That's why the Labour Party was created. I'm never going to give up that fight, she said. And she talked about her faith, her Christian faith as well, and that's what motivates her in politics. She then went, she said, I need to go and just calm down in my office for a moment. So she did that, and then she came here to be in for an interview with Sky News, and this is part of what she told me in that interview.
Well, first of all, I don't see myself as a rebel, but somebody that is prepared to fulfil my role here of holding the executive to account and speaking truth to power. And I'm somebody that is a bridge builder in life and really reaches in to a situation. And I hold my hand out to the Prime Minister and hope he takes that and wants to reach back. Because I think it's really important that we work together. That's where the Labour Party came from. But, obviously choices have been made today. I'm not going to comment on that. But what I am saying is that there is a special purpose to the Labour Party, and that is to speak for those people in our society who have felt so disenfranchised because of 14 years of having broken public services and having an economy in tatters, and people are paying heavily for that. And of course, I want to see Labour succeed. I've fought so hard all my life for this party, and that will continue because I believe that Labour has got the ability and has got the opportunity to really transform people's lives. And it's right that we get people into work. I want to see that happen, but I want to protect and look after people when they're at their most fragile.
You mentioned the Prime Minister. I know you speak to the Chief Whip. Have you spoken to the Prime Minister about this? Because he has been criticised by some of your colleagues for not taking the trouble to speak to MPs like you who have serious concerns about this. Have you talked to the PM?
Look, I recognise the world is falling apart at the moment, and the Prime Minister has got his hands rightly full with all of those challenges. I have written to the Prime Minister, of course, over this. I've reached in. I haven't spoken to him this afternoon. Obviously, I've just been suspended. But I really do hope, I say to Keir Starmer and everyone really within our party, I'm here and I'm really willing to engage with them because I want us to get this right. I want this to be the greatest government that has ever been. That is my ambition every day because my constituents deserve deserve a really good outcome from this government. So, of course, I will continue doing what I always do in this place.
But did you speak to the Prime Minister in the week of that big rebellion? There was criticism that he didn't, for example, call rebel MPs or potential rebel MPs into his office, that he was a bit distant. OK, you're saying he's a busy chap with all his, all the international affairs and so on. But did he speak to you in the run-up to that vote?
I didn't speak to the Prime Minister, but I did speak to the Secretary of State and ministers because, as I say, I always push in because I think it's really important to speak wherever we can. We are a parliament, that's about speaking, and therefore, of course, I take every opportunity of every platform to be able to do that.
Well, that was hardly rebellious talk, was it, saying she wanted the Labour government to succeed? But it was telling that she said she hadn't had a conversation with the Prime Minister. And there are plenty of MPs who say that the problem for the PM is he is too distant, didn't bother to talk to MPs. I mean, we all know when there's rebellions happen, the PM often has MPs into his room, tries to win them over. Clearly that didn't happen. So, as I say, a lot of sympathy for Rachel Maskell, less so for the others, but she is certainly determined to carry on this fight, as she said. I'm not going to give up the fight, so she's perhaps going to be suspended for a while longer, although she's hopeful she's going to get the Labour whip back. But it's not going to be a while, of course, because Parliament's breaking up. Commons on Tuesday, Lords next Thursday.
Yeah, only a few days left, as you say. Everyone a little bit doom and happy, perhaps. John Craig there for us in Central Lobby. It was really interesting hearing John there and his interview with Rachel Maskell, where she was talking about not speaking to Keir Starmer, because that also came out loud and clear with an interview that I did with one of the other suspended MPs, Brian Leishman, who said he hadn't spoken to Keir Starmer in the entire time since he was elected. Thank you very much for being on the programme. It's good to have you here. You were called into the Whip's office today. What happened?
Basically, I was informed after Prime Minister's questions that I was going to have a temporary suspension of the Whip pending investigation into my voting record and some of the things that I've said that have been deemed detrimental to the government in the media.
And did they explain, what those things were, for example? Or?
No, that wasn't any in-depth conversation. Of course, I was shocked at the news and incredibly disappointed. I mean, I love the Labour Party. My home politically is in the Labour Party, and I want to get the Whip back. So, yeah, it was a real shock.
What did you say to them?
I listened, mainly. I was in a state of shock, and I asked for it in writing. And to be honest, it's in... Look, what is the route back into the Parliamentary Labour Party? Because I was elected as a Labour MP, but really, I was elected to serve the constituents of Alloa and Grangemouth, and that's what I think I've done in my first 12 months.
You say that you were shocked when you went in there and you got the news. Did you have any kind of prior warning? Had you had any contact with the Whips before?
None at all. It was a complete bolt from the blue. To receive news of the suspension. I was very, very shocked. And
how about the Prime Minister? Has he made any attempt to kind of reach out to you over the last few months, or for example?
I haven't. In my 12 months as an MP, I haven't spoken with the Prime Minister personally at all, apart from the 3 Prime Minister's questions that I've asked.
So you haven't actually had any contact with Keir Starmer in that time then?
Zero.
So I guess, what some people might be saying in Number 10 or in the Labour Party is like, look, you rebelled, right? You've broken the whip. What did you think was going to happen?
Well, as I said, Sophie, my loyalty is to the constituents that elected me to Westminster. Now, when we look at, without going into individual policies that the government have put forward, no one thought they would elect an MP to go and make society worse or make them poorer. I've went down there and I've tried to fight on personal constituents and constituency issues and wider national issues that I think, to be honest, is the wrong course of action that the government have taken.
And I guess some would say, if you're looking specifically on welfare, the government changed its course on welfare, and they said that they've been listening to backbenchers such as yourself.
Well, we saw a raft of concessions from the government that got the bill into a better place. Ultimately, the bill still wasn't fit for purpose. And I will stand by what I said in the run-up to the second and the third reading and what I was saying for months. The bill should have been pulled and actually proper consideration with disability charities and organisations and actually come up with a welfare system worthy of the name.
Some in Number 10 are suggesting that the reason that these 4 MPs have been singled out is for organising, for effectively kind of plotting. What would you say to that?
Well, I would say that what we've got to do is we work as a collective. That's the whole point of the Labour Party, the sum of its parts, and so on and so forth. And yes, when the government does take the wrong direction, it's incumbent on backbench MPs to actually try and be that compass for the party leadership, to actually say, you're heading in the wrong direction here, and actually offer the rational and logical way to making things better.
How do you think Keir Starmer's relationship is with his backbenchers?
Well, I'm not going to comment on fellow Labour Party backbenchers, but I think it's been well documented that, and I answered it already, we don't really have that personal relationship. Now, I appreciate he is the most important politician in the country, but international issues, domestic issues, but you've also got to make sure that everything at home is right. And I think it's quite clear that it's not.
Have any other MPs been in contact with you, showing solidarity, for example?
Oh, absolutely. I've got many great friends that are in the PLP, and, you know, we're very lucky. There are some phenomenal MPs from all over the country, not just from Scotland. And yes, I've appreciated their message of support and solidarity.
So you think that this might, I guess, go against the Prime Minister among some backbenchers, this decision?
I don't know. I can only comment on it for myself, and I'm incredibly disappointed. I mean, I'm devastated. I'm a proud Labour Party member, and I have been for quite some years, and I still think that the Labour Party is the true vehicle for positive social mobility and actually making the country a much fairer and equal place.
So you're not tempted by the new party on the left, the Zara Sultana, Jeremy Corbyn party?
I have the utmost respect for Jeremy and Zara. They've been fantastic parliamentarians, and, you know, they've been very, very supportive to me as a new MP in my first year. I've got all the respect in the world for them, but as I say, I still think that the Labour Party, with the infrastructure and the people involved and the phenomenal grassroots members that we have, I still think that is the real vehicle for social change in the country.
So you rule out joining it then?
I'm a Labour Party member.
OK, thank you very much. Right, let's bring our duo for the evening, shall we? The former Scottish National Party Westminster leader, Ian Blackford, and the former Conservative Culture Minister, Lord Ed Vaisey. Great to have you both with us. Ed, what do you reckon to this? Is this like a storm in a teacup? Does this, you know, strengthen his hand, or actually are there risks here?
It's really interesting to watch the interviews, especially Craig's with Rachel Maskell, who I think, you know, I don't know her very well. She comes across as a kind of saintly figure. It strikes me that she's probably very popular with Labour backbenchers. Nobody likes to see someone like that, I think, given harsh treatment. You do recognise that party discipline is important. There's a reason there's a whip. There's a reason that parties have a whip, because you have to sometimes hold your nose and vote for stuff that you wouldn't necessarily support in order for the government to get its business done. It is difficult, but it brought back for me the time when I lost the whip, particularly Brian's interview there with you. It's really personal. It's really personal. And your reaction when the whip is taken from you is, who are you to take it from me? Because, you know, I campaigned for the Tory.
There, by the way.
I campaigned for the Tory party all my life. That's what Brian was saying, Labour through and through. You've got to remember, there's a feeling, Keir Starmer, you know, you came a bit late to this game. You haven't necessarily paid your dues. You're taking the whip away from people who've spent their life campaigning for this party. So they've got to be careful. It's a real dilemma. Yeah. I agree there has to be some discipline, action, but it can backfire.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, I think Rachel is someone, just as Ed has said, is very widely respected right across the House. A principled politician. I mean, she's spoken eloquently about what she sees as her constituents' interests. And I know, having been in York, that she's very, very well regarded within her constituency. I mean, Ed is right, and particularly about the responsibility that the whips have. But there's various, without going into the black arts, there's various mechanisms that whips can deploy to manage situations, let's put it that way. I think for the Labour Party to take the action they've taken today is a very dangerous move, because you then create a precedent as to what has to happen. But, and Sophie, I'd also say, what do we want from parliamentarians? Do we want people that are automatons, that are always there to do what they're told? Or are they there to speak up for their constituents? We need strong voices in Parliament. Up to a point.
Up to a point. You wouldn't have supported that in the Scottish Parliament. I mean, well, there is this. You get this a lot from constituents. You know, you're all just you're not independent. The government has to get its business done.
True.
They're in Parliament because they had the word Labour on the ballot paper, not because they had the word Maskell.
Absolutely, and I think I absolutely agree with that. But there are ways of doing it. I mean, I only ever took the whip away from SNP MPs for disciplinary matters where there was no other option. I did come close on another occasion where there was a point of principle on a vote where I had a number of MPs that were going to rebel, and I sat down with them and I went through the position I would be put in and the opportunities that we had to get round it.
Yeah.
You don't want to be coming out with the big stick, because actually I would go as far to say that's poor leadership.
Yes.
You lose your authority to some extent. And let's not forget the scale of the Labour rebellion that there was on a matter that was not in the manifesto, because that's important. If you defy the whips on a manifesto promise, that's a very different thing from what
I
has
think
happened
Sophie wants to move on now.
No, I don't actually. I want to continue. I just wanted to butt in, basically.
Yes,
You two have a
that's
nice
what I
little
meant.
chat between each other.
Butt back in.
Trying to elbow my way into
Back
the
in.
conversation. I mean, it makes my job easier, I guess. So, no. Number 10, I guess, would say that they've got to get this stuff through. They've just faced a massive rebellion, and they're worried that, I guess, all these MPs have got a bit of a taste for it, on whether it's winter fuel, whether it's benefits. If they're going to try and make these hard decisions, they need to show a bit of iron will.
When I was listening to what Ian was saying there, and it was interesting because it sort of took me back to the point that, the failure started 6 weeks before the vote. It was a failure of the whipping operation.
That's right.
And as Ian said, you can sit down and head people off, but you have to do it at the right moment. Correct. And the thing got such momentum. They're now trying to, as it put, a sticking plaster on this mess up. And they should have been sorting this out and so it goes to the heart of the government's operation, this massive majority, by the inability to craft their policies and legislation to keep the majority of their backbenchers on board.
I mean, the news management from the Labour government has been poor. They're in a hole in that regard, and there's obviously the fiscal situation, and maybe come and talk about that later. But the Labour government's got to get its act together. There's no point blaming MPs in a situation like this on a principle of what they believed they were doing the right thing because they were not manifesto commitments. Someone like Rachel Maskell, who has got immense support in the backbenches, that is the wrong thing for the Chief Whip and for the Prime Minister to be doing, and it doesn't strengthen his authority.
Really interesting debate. Thanks both very much indeed. We'll have lots more from you both throughout the programme as well. You're watching The Politics Hub. Coming up, the Prime Minister says the Conservatives have serious questions to answer over the Afghan data breach. We'll take a look at how this extraordinary story was kept under wraps.
I'm Stephen Murphy and I'm Sky's Ireland correspondent based here in Dublin.
The waters of Ireland and Britain should be home to great white sharks.
If there are great white sharks in this area, there's no reason they wouldn't come here to feed. It's basically a buffet on a beach. This could be not only a record-breaking storm, but potentially the most dangerous storm ever to hit Ireland.
Hello, welcome back. Now, the Prime Minister has said that the former Conservative ministers have serious questions to answer about how the names of 19,000 Afghans were leaked and then kept secret via super injunction. Now, those involved had applied to come to the UK. Some had worked with UK forces, and the fear was that the list could then fall into the hands of the Taliban. Well, this is what Keir Starmer had to say at Prime Minister's Questions.
There's always been support across this House for the United Kingdom fulfilling our obligations to Afghans who served alongside British forces. We warned in opposition about Conservative management of this policy, and yesterday the Defence Secretary set out the full extent of the failings that we inherited. A major data breach, a super injunction, a secret route that has already cost hundreds of millions of pounds. Ministers who served under the party opposite have serious questions to answer about how this was ever allowed to happen. Indicated that he intends to hold further inquiries. I welcome that and hope that those who were in office at the time will welcome that scrutiny.
Keir Starmer there speaking in the Commons a little earlier. Well, of course, nobody's been able to talk about the data breach until this week. Our political correspondent Rob Powell has been taking a look into the timeline of how this was all kept behind closed doors.
An extraordinary leak, but an even more extraordinary reaction by the previous government. Now, this all started in February 2022. Boris Johnson was still in office when the data breach initially happened. But we're told it took 18 months for the Ministry of Defence to be made aware after some of the data appeared online and journalists started asking questions. By this time, Rishi Sunak was Prime Minister and his Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, applied for the injunction, he says, to protect those at risk from the leak. Ben Wallace then stood down and was replaced by Grant Shapps as Defence Secretary, and in September, a High Court judge gave the government more than it had asked for by granting a super injunction, banning anyone from reporting that the court order even existed. Now, in October, the government asked for this super injunction to continue, but then in November, a different judge seemed to sound the alarm, saying the super injunction was likely to give rise to the understandable suspicion that the court's processes are being used for the purposes of censorship. But he went on to approve a 4-week extension to it anyway. Now, the following month, ministers met to arrange a new secret resettlement route for people put at risk by the data breach. 4,500 Afghans would come to the UK this way at a cost of over £800 million to the taxpayer. The super injunction was also extended for another 2 months at this point and continued again in February 2024 until the 21st of May, when the same judge ordered it to be lifted, saying it is fundamentally objectionable for decisions that affect the lives and safety of thousands of human beings and involve the commitment of billions of pounds of public money to be taken in circumstances where they are completely insulated from public debate. Now, the day after that ruling, Rishi Sunak called the general election, under pressure on both public spending and immigration. But then, in the middle of the campaign, government lawyers went back to court to appeal the decision. 3 judges agreed and blocked the lifting of the order, meaning the details of the leak, which, remember, would have been revealed days ahead of the general election, well, they stayed secret. Now, the July general election, of course, then brought Labour to power, and in February this year, the new Defence Secretary, John Healey, is warned about the multi-billion-pound costs of the Afghan resettlement schemes, and he orders a review. Now, that finds the data leak is unlikely to have increased the risk to affected Afghans, and so the government asks for the super injunction to be lifted, and the details are made public. It's a long and messy saga, played out largely behind closed doors, that raises big questions about the power of government and the courts in times of crisis.
Well, Rob's come in to join us now. Rob, this is such... I mean, we're all kind of scrambling to get our heads around this story, right? But it's the cover-up, isn't it, if you like? I mean, maybe cover-up is too strong a word, but the super injunctions, the fact that we're only learning about this now, I mean, it's pretty extraordinary.
I think what lies at the crux of it is when the motivation for using this extraordinary legal power, when or if, I guess, it moves from protecting the Afghans that were on this list and were at risk to potentially protecting politicians in Westminster. Now, today we've heard a lot from Ben Wallace. He's been very proactive, coming out, written an article, done interviews. He was the person that initially applied for this injunction. He's at pains to point out he didn't apply for the super injunction. That basically stops the reporting of the fact that the order has even been made. He applied for the injunction to basically buy some time, I think, as he puts it, to figure out what on earth was going on and try and put some sort of plan in place to make sure no one got harmed. Days later, he moved out of his post. That was planned. He stepped down. Grant Shapps came in. He was in post through the sort of quite remarkable expansion of this over 2 years. We haven't heard from Grant Shapps today. He hasn't been doing interviews. But if you look at a line chart of the people that were being resettled from Afghanistan, it's amazing. It climbs from 2021 and then it starts to level off in 2023. But then when you get to late 2023, after this secret scheme is set up, after this leak has come to light, it starts to go up again. So those were people being brought to the country, housed in the country, paid for, obviously, with public money, with no scrutiny by MPs, with the public not knowing at all. And there's a remarkable part in one of the transcripts of one of these secret court hearings that The Telegraph has published today, in which the judge refers to a suggestion that he says had been put to him, that an announcement is made to Parliament, to the Commons, to essentially provide cover, is the word he uses, or he says was put to him, for these numbers going up. I mean, that sounds like something being cooked up to essentially mislead Parliament. And then I think if you think about the politics of the time, Rishi Sunak in the last few months before the general election, big discussions over what the country can afford in terms of spending, whether the national insurance tax cuts were really affordable, lots of pressure over immigration as well. You can sort of see the political context to all of this. And the timing is pretty remarkable as well, because if that initial decision by the judge to lift the super injunction, if that hadn't been reversed by the Court of Appeal, you would have found all of this detail that dropped yesterday dropping halfway through the general election campaign. Can you imagine that?
I mean, you know, you and me both cover that election campaign, and I think it's fair to say that that would have had a pretty, big impact on the narrative, wouldn't it? I think that's fair to say. Rob, stay here if you would. I want to bring you guys in as well. Because, Ian, you were just talking a bit earlier, weren't we, about, I guess it's the scrutiny that many people will see as an issue, because there's an awful lot of public money that has been spent here.
Yeah, I have to say I'm very worried about what has happened over the course of the last couple of years. And it really gets to the heart of what kind of democracy do we live in. And to have a government that's concealed this information from Parliament, from the public for so long. I mean, Rob's talked about the fact that there's the charge that Parliament could have been misled. That's a very, very serious charge, because if a minister misleads Parliament, they resigns. But what I'm particularly concerned about, and I'm glad that Ben Wallace has come into this, and I want to give Ben credit for how he behaved with opposition leaders at the time of the Ukraine war, because Ben would bring in the leader of the opposition, Keir Starmer, John Healey as the defence spokesperson for Labour, myself and Ed Davey, and we got briefings every 2 weeks.
On Ukraine.
On Ukraine. Yeah. And, that was really important to make sure that consensus across the House on important matters of national security. Now, we already have mechanisms where parliamentarians can participate because of the structure of Privy Council membership, for example, the Privy Council discussions that we have. The Intelligence and Security Committee could have played a role, or you could have had a senior committee of MPs, Privy Councillors, that could have held the executive to account on the basis of that being done in private. But I can also understand, Sophie, why, because of that threat to human life, that the super injunction was granted in the initial period. But there are no circumstances that should have been rolled over. And what I'm really concerned about is the precedent that we've now created, not just for this government, but for future governments. It's a really worrying moment for our democracy, what has played out.
Ed, what do you say?
I think Ian's analysis is fascinating because, it took me a while, a day, really, to get my head around this story, exactly what happened. Because, of course, we have the Afghan resettlement scheme for Afghans who work with the British Army. That was well known. This was a separate scheme. It wasn't a resettlement scheme. It was people who wanted to come to the UK who were due to effectively be vetted in private. Then the risk that the a list would become public because it had been leaked, so the scramble to bring them to the UK on the assumption that they were at risk. And what Ian was saying there was, perhaps if there had been some form of parliamentary scrutiny, there would have been much more of a debate, the kind of debate that John Healey eventually had effectively by appointing an independent inquiry within the MOD to come to the conclusion, actually, this list didn't put Afghans at greater risk. It was costing an absolute fortune. It was completely out with public scrutiny, and it had to be stopped. And I saw John Healey on the television in the morning, and he's played a pretty straight bat, but there's no doubt, and you saw it with Keir Starmer, that in the terms of the politics of this is landing firmly on the mat of the Conservatives. It doesn't surprise me to hear Ben Wallace going out to defend it. Ben was a very straight Secretary of State and had huge respect, but it will land on Tories. And then you've got, just turning to the domestic politics here, you've got the reform playbook coming into gear, as we've seen about, who are these Afghans coming to our country and what are they going to get up to?
But that example of the ISC, Ed, I think is an important one, because the ISC holds the intelligence agencies to account, recognises the responsibilities that they have, of course, publishes reports, but they take into consideration fully the responsibilities that they have. So it didn't have to be in the public domain, but you would have had the checks and balances of Parliament still holding the government to account. And, the fact that we've had this scheme, we've had the government spending, this is, to say it's irregular is an understatement, but it's a real threat to our democratic institutions that this has happened.
I mean,
and
Rob,
it's happened for so long.
Rob, it's interesting to hear sort of the discussion there about how Reform are starting to have their own angle on this. It has felt like this is a story that's kind of evolved, over the last kind of 2 days, as everyone's got their heads around what's happened.
Yeah, I think so, and I think it will continue to, because there have been, I think, some calls for public inquiry into this. The government seems to be resisting that at the moment. But what we will get is the Defence Select Committee at the moment hearing witnesses. You imagine that will include people like Grant Shapps coming before that committee with some very, very difficult questions about what they knew and why they acted as they did. And as you say, it has already taken on a political dimension. Yeah. And in terms of a plague on both your houses message that Reform are trying to push, I guess it fits squarely into that narrative.
Ed, can I ask you a bit about super injunctions? As like a kind of former, culture minister, because it felt like a few years ago they were kind of all the rage, but they are pretty controversial.
They were all the rage. I mean, they are very controversial. And you remember, people have been asking today whether MPs, if they had known about this, could have raised it in Parliament, be protected by parliamentary privilege. And there was, I think it was a Lib Dem MP who raised a super injunction that a footballer had in his favour and brought it up in Parliament. And they are very crude mechanisms. I mean, I think what has happened is it's interesting whether Parliament will ever want to touch this, because obviously it affects MPs personally as well. We've had this creation of a privacy law by the courts, really, and they've gradually increased the right for people in public life, if you like, to have privacy, or normal people to have privacy, depending on the nature of the story that's being written. But it is all being done by the common law and by the courts, and not really by Parliament. And the super injunction is a symptom of that. The courts are much happier to grant these wide-ranging injunctions. Remember, this isn't an injunction saying don't publish the story, it's an injunction saying you can't even hint that there is a story.
Injunction against the world.
It drives the papers absolutely mad, and they're becoming more common because the courts have created a relatively strong privacy law that wasn't really around 10 or 15 years ago.
Really interesting debate. Thanks all very much indeed. Thank you, Rob, as well. Well, of course, the continued fallout from that Afghan data breach is sure to feature in tomorrow's newspapers. We'll have our extended press preview. That's from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the Daily Mirror columnist Kevin Maguire and the political commentator, someone you might have heard of, Adam Bolton. You're watching The Politics Hub. Coming up, a report into the UK's anti-extremism programme Prevent says lessons must be learned after it failed to stop the Southport attacker and the killer of MP Sir David Amess. Stay with us. A report into the UK's anti-terrorism scheme Prevent has found chances were missed after it failed to stop the Southport attacker and also the man who murdered the MP, Sir David Amess. Now, Lord Anderson, the report's author, said lessons must continue to be learned, as social affairs correspondent Becky Johnson reports.
Prevent failed and people died. 3 young girls stabbed to death in Southport last summer. Their murderer, free to travel to a dance class to kill them, had been referred to the government's counter-terror programme 3 times. On each occasion, despite his obsession with mass killings, the case was closed because no one particular ideology was identified. This report says Prevent should be looking at people like him.
Short term, we have to acknowledge the nature of terrorism has changed. It's harder now to tell whether someone has got a terrorist ideology or something else. And we've got to stop fussing about exactly what's inside their head and put the safety of the people first, including, of course, the person that you're dealing with.
The families of the Southport victims say real change now needs to come in order to prevent what they're facing. They're calling on the government and authorities to ensure they do more than simply pay lip service. At this boxing gym near Telford, they take young people referred by police, social workers and schools. They see troubled, violent teens. Surprise here that Prevent is only now being told to adapt to the online world.
I think the risk of online radicalisation of young people needs to be taken a lot more seriously. I think young people are no longer feeling safer online. I think it's so much easier to access harmful content. We're seeing a rise of young people accessing that content, accessing communities that are unsafe.
Prevent also failed to identify the risk posed by the murderer of the MP, Sir David Amess. Ali Harbi Ali murdered Sir David years after being referred to Prevent, but his case was closed. That was human error. The MP's family are demanding a public inquiry. What this report highlights is that Prevent is failing to detect potentially dangerous individuals in too many cases. And every time someone slips through the net, the consequences can be devastating. In a written statement, the Home Secretary Yvette Cooper said the report clearly highlights the failings of Prevent in both the Southport case and that of Sir David Amess, whilst also recognising the energy and urgency that has been shown in making changes to strengthen Prevent. That means identifying violent individuals intent on killing, regardless of ideology, to stop atrocities that raise questions over the ability of the state to keep the public safe. Becky Johnson, Sky News.
Right, let's bring in Ian and Ed again, shall we? It's such a difficult one, isn't it? Because obviously, when someone does fall through the net, when Prevent doesn't work as it should, it can have catastrophic consequences, Ed.
That's precisely the point. And of course, the point is that there are maybe dozens and dozens of these killers who have been stopped by the Prevent programme, as in people being alerted and action being taken. And there may be lots of young men, and it's predominantly young men, who've been diverted by the kind of clubs you saw there, the boxing academy. So there is an element of kind of how do you help young people? How do you get them active? How do you get them engaged in this online world where they can be radicalised so easily? The trouble with how the kind of report has come across is it's kind of criticised Prevent and said it failed to stop these 2 horrific incidents and murders. But I'm not sure you can ever expect a programme like that to eradicate every single possible risk. I think it's completely unrealistic. I'd much rather see a report that says, this is what Prevent has achieved, this is how it can be better, is it worth keeping, is it worth investing the money we're investing in, is it being spent well?
I think Ed is right. I mean, when I was in the ISC, we did look at Prevent, and Prevent...
Intelligence and Security.
And it does, in general, it works well. However, when you have the loss of life, as we had with the 3 young girls in Stockport, and obviously David Amess, the public are revulsed to see those things taking place. And it's right that we do then ask the questions about what lessons can be learned. How can we improve the Prevent programme? Because quite simply, we have to eradicate the risk of these kind of things happening. One, it's too many. But we should recognise there's a lot of good work that goes on under the programme. As Ed has said, there are a lot of potential attacks are thwarted, but we need to thwart all attacks if it's to be as successful as we need it to be.
Is there a concern about the kind of funding settlements with the Home Office and for the police that we could see coming forward, do you think?
Well, I mean, I think what is going on in the Home Office is a symptom of what is frustrating me about everything really to do with public services, which is that we know that there are big problems, for example, in our prisons. We've talked about the Prevent programme heading off youngsters in terms of radicalisation. What happens to these guys when they are caught and put in prison? We know what happens. A lot of them are radicalised in prison. They could be going into prison for offences that have absolutely nothing to do with terrorism. Could be straightforward burglary. So we need to really think of a kind of whole holistic approach in how you kind of rehabilitate people. Yeah. And the trouble with we're always talking about budgets and cuts and are you going to give a department more money or less money? But we never really talk about the kind of radical changes we need to give people, to put in place policies that will enable us to follow people on their journey and try and divert them. Because the minute you stop one youngster using the Prevent programme, you might be creating another radicalised youngster when you send them to prison for burglary.
And also, I guess a lot of these people are acting alone as well. This is the other thing, that they're not part of a wider network, which makes them automatically much more difficult to find.
It makes it much more difficult. But again, that's why we cannot... we need to make sure that we're investing enough in the Prevent programme and our security establishment, because we have to do everything that we can to stop this. But there is no question that the lone wolf operator is something which is very, very difficult to detect. And it does come down to that human aspect of those that are on the programme. I mean, we know in both these cases that they've both been sent for analysis, but they've slipped through the net, and we need to make sure that we tighten up.
And as you say, when something like Southport happened, which, I mean, I don't know about you, but that's one of the most horrific stories.
I remember your reaction
it's
when it happened.
It's such an appalling story, and to know that the perpetrator came in contact with the authorities and that there must have been chances to stop that happening. Yeah,
it is. It's of course it's fantastically frustrating, but of course we weren't there when this person came within the purview of Prevent. And if you look back at almost any terrorist incident, I think in the Manchester Arena bombing, almost every terrorist will have had some kind of contact with the authorities. And it's incredibly frustrating when you hear that. But you've got to remember that we weren't there, sifting through endless files of potential people, each of whom could be the perpetrator of a horrific crime. And how on earth do you sort through that?
Really interesting debate. Thanks both very much indeed. Still to come on the Politics Hub. As the Prime Minister prepares for a visit from the German Chancellor tomorrow, there's talk that a new Eurostar-style train link could be in the works.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8, Afghan interpreters who worked for the British military tell Sky News they feel betrayed by the government over the data leak at the Ministry of Defence. Also tonight, I'll be joined in the studio by campaigners who are demanding a state apology for women forced to give up their babies for adoption between the 1940s and 1970s. That's the UK Tonight from 8.
I'm Siobhan Robbins, Sky's Europe correspondent based here in Berlin.
In Sweden, police have seized a lethal stash.
Anyone of any age could say, I'll do that for £1 million and then have to go and shoot someone.
Yes. Sky News, the full story first. I'm Greg Milam and I'm Sky's Chief North of England correspondent.
This is insane. This was a bustling residential area.
I'm Yusra Al-Bagher, Sky's Africa correspondent based in Johannesburg, South Africa.
How difficult is this to police tonight? Off the scale.
I'm Dan Whitehead, Sky News' West of England and Wales correspondent.
Our app gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos and analysis.
Evidence of the crisis.
Podcasts watching us live.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Wherever you get your podcast.
All in one place and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
I'm Neville Lazarus and I'm Sky's reporter based in Delhi. Over the next 45 days, an estimate 400 million Hindu pilgrims are expected to converge here in Prayagraj on the banks of the holy river Ganga and Yamuna.
Jubilation in the streets,
while some emotional. This is a political victory for Prime Minister Modi and his Hindu Nationalist Party. We take you to the heart of the story in the largest democracy in the world.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. I'm ready. Are you? Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
I'm Cordelia Lynch, Sky's Asia correspondent based here in Bangkok. We've been undercover inside Asia's huge network of scam centres.
This compound is, without a doubt, the worst. It is essentially hell on earth.
We cover a vast, varied and dynamic region that's shaping the rest of the world.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, tomorrow is shaping up to be a pretty big day for Anglo-German relations because the German Chancellor is going to be visiting the United Kingdom. He's going to be meeting Sir Keir Starmer and they're due to sign a pretty wide-ranging treaty on further coordination on defence, on economic growth, on tackling illegal immigration, so lots of things on the agenda. But there is something else that is going to catch the eye of rail enthusiasts. Their reports that they'll also be discussing a direct train link between London and Berlin, so it would work a little bit like the Eurostar that you can see on your screens right now. So how excited are we about this prospect? We can chat again to Ian and Ed. Ed, what do you reckon?
I am excited, but I'm also depressed because it reminds me that, sorry to sound like a cracked record, but Brexit, you know, the big point was that, you know, more and more, you know, travel is getting easier and easier. And it is amazing that you can be in Paris quicker, if you're coming from London, you can be in Paris quicker than you can be in Edinburgh. Mm-hmm. And soon, you know, in theory, I mean, they obviously will have to use the Eurotunnel, and but the idea that you could be in Berlin in 4 hours from London is pretty incredible. I think it's really exciting. But, you know, more and more of these contacts and ties across Europe, more and more of the younger generation of this country feeling physical links to Europe and therefore more European. And what have we done to them? We've pulled ourselves out of this great free trade cultural zone.
Well, you're not going to find any disagreement with me on that, are you? But, you know, it's great. There's going to be a direct train to Berlin. Can you imagine if we could actually fill it with goods? What Keir could do tomorrow is recognise that we're in a fiscal hole. We're talking about how we fix the budget later this year. Well, guess what, Keir? Take us back into the single market and the customs union. Yeah. We know the economic damage that's been done. We cannot continue taxing our way. As we're going to find out in the budget later this year, we need economic growth. Let's fix the relationship with Europe.
Why is Merz not getting a state visit there? He must be cheesed off that Macron got the full,
the
full 3 days.
King Charles.
Yeah, why is he not getting
City of London
sauerkraut and stuff at Buckingham Palace?
I don't know. He should have done, really.
You know, he's in a Macron-Trump sandwich, state banquet sandwich.
That's true.
He gets the small pickings.
True. They're handing them out all the time, like confetti at the minute, these state visits, aren't
they? Well, they could have gone to Scotland, because I know that the King has been up in Scotland over the course of the last couple of weeks. Could have had a state visit to...
How do you know the King's been in Scotland?
Because there's been lots of engagements. There have.
What have you been to?
I haven't been to any of them, but I'm sure that everyone's enjoyed them, having been up in Holyrood. But no, we could have had that state visit up in Scotland.
And what's it like?
What's it
like for your party when the King comes to Scotland? Do they all rock up and pretend that they like him?
Well, you know, of course, it's the monarchy of Scotland as well as England. They came up to Scotland to take the honours of Scotland after the coronation in London, so we should never forget that it's our king as well as your king, if I can put it that way, Ed.
Yeah, and we were debating today whether to return the Parthenon sculptures to Greece, and I'm reminded that quite recently the Stone of Scone, the papers, John Major's decision to send it back to Scotland, the sky didn't fall in. It was a great gesture.
No, we should return the Parthenon marbles, but by the same token...
Is that official SNP party policy?
Well, it's my view. I'm not now beholden to the whip. I can't get into trouble. Yeah. But you know, I would like us to get the Sky chessmen back in the Isle of Lewis as well as...
They're the ones that are going to France.
Indeed.
Well, maybe you could get them... Because the Scots and the French have always had this peculiar alliance against the British.
You know, when we were trying to persuade you to come on the panel tonight, I had a chat with my producer Ollie and said, just tell him we can talk about the marbles and he'll come on. And there we go.
We did a deal.
We managed to win it without me even doing it. Extraordinary stuff. Absolutely extraordinary. Thanks both very much indeed. Good to have you on the panel this evening. That is it from us tonight, but I'll see you tomorrow at 7 p.m. Up next, it's UK Tonight with Sarah J. Mee, and then, of course, at 9 p.m, you've got The World with Yada Hakeem. We'll see you tomorrow.